Welcome back to the second live broadcast of our symposium on the open source software in cultural heritage organizations. If you're new to the symposium today, if you missed yesterday, we have a recording of that that we will be taking from the Georgia Tech webinar system and posting it up on YouTube, so you'll be able to see that later. We're really excited about the participation that we've seen sign up for this webinar and the comments that we've received through Twitter and on the SCHOSS site. Again, we have participants here from nearly every state in the United States and from several continents. So those of you in Europe and Africa where it's evening, thank you for coming back to this second day. As Kate said yesterday, Lyrasis has a long commitment to open source software. We've provided introductory webinars and training on open source. We host the FOSS4Lib.org decision support tools site. And we're organizing this symposium for the discussion of open source software in cultural heritage organizations. We could not have done this without the grant support from the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation. And so I will repeat Kate and ask everybody to look to New York, which for those of us in the room is roughly that way, and thank the Mellon Foundation for the grant that supported bringing us here and bringing us all together online. You know, open source is deceptively easy. On the one hand, the source code is just out there for anyone to take and use. But on the other hand, it takes significant effort to build the community around open source software. And that's what we've been talking about yesterday and today. What is it about that community that we can learn about? There's lots of stuff about you know, open source software and what it means, but what does it mean to have a community? We've had two broad topics to discuss. Yesterday we focused on how open source projects can create the right conditions for engagement from the community of users. And we had three panelists yesterday that offered that perspective. Today's broadcast, I'll start with a recap of what we talked about yesterday, in case you missed that. And then we're going to focus on the topic of what does it mean from an institution's point of view to adopt an open source package. And you know that I use the word adopt because it means something different. We talked about marketing yesterday and how we buy open source software, or we buy proprietary systems. And I really think in open source, we really adopt them as institutions. Although nothing can replace the intimacy of a face-to-face discussion, you know, as Kate said yesterday, we really wanted to bring people together and have that face-to-face intimacy, but it's just cost prohibitive. So we're doing the next best thing by having this live broadcast and then having a feature-rich web-based discussion platform that I hope you guys use to interact not only with each other across the world, but we'll use that as that discussion site as part of our panel later on. In a moment, I'll step from this podium and go to the display screen and walk you through what it means, the features of that discussion site. After the symposium, I encourage you to look at the resources of the FOSS4Lib.org site to help you in your decision-making processes at your institution about open source software. There are tools and documents that help you decide if open source software is right for you. That's an important question to ask yourself right from the start. And then a registry of packages that can help you in your process of deciding which open source software is right for you. The homepage of the main fossforlib.org website has a green box that invites you to sign up for the Introducing FOSS for Lib webinar. The next one will be on October 28th. So I'm going to shift over right now. Oh, it was turned off. Thank you. Okay. All right. Thank you. I was kind of wondering why he was staring at me in the back of the room. So, like I said, we're using a tool to foster discussion, even though we're not in the same place at the same time. It's based on a piece of, again, open source software called Discourse that we're using to facilitate our discussions. One of the first things you'll need to do is to come to the sign up window here. If you have an account on many of these other services and want to link it to your discussion here, you're welcome to do that. Or you can use the form to create a username and password specifically for this site. If you haven't signed up yet based on yesterday's symposium, I encourage you to do that now so that you're live in the discussion system when we roll around to the speakers. When you do click on that Create a New Account button, it will send you an email message that will ask you to verify that your email address is valid. So you'll want to go through those steps before you'll be able to contribute. To get you familiar with this system, as I did yesterday, I encourage you to come to this welcome introduce yourself topic. There's many people here, 33 people that have introduced themselves since yesterday. As we scroll down, we can see them coming by here. We can also see our progress bar down here at the bottom as we scroll through them. I encourage you to try out the system using this welcome topic. Just click reply. You'll get this two-pane window. Anything you type here, shows up over here as a preview. So we have functions that we can bold things, italicize things, link out to other documents as you want to share with others, and so forth. There is a community guidelines here that I encourage you to look at, maybe just briefly review while I'm talking about the features of the site. We want to have a welcoming space for everyone that is participating in this discussion. So we have a code of conduct, and we have moderators that are not only watching the code of conduct, but helping with the management of the discussion as well. If you do see something that goes against the code of conduct of our community, I encourage you to use this flag button on it. We'll flag my post from earlier today. This one was off topic. And that will get flagged to our moderators. The system is also set that if a post receives a certain number of flags, it will automatically take action. So we've had a few cases of people signing up spam accounts and already posting spam here. So if any of that shows up, feel free to flag it, and we'll take care of it. But in a similar light, I also encourage you to like posts. So I've flagged this one, but I'm also going to like it. That's kind of schizophrenic. and by liking things, it puts this reply higher up. It gives it more weight so that it flags us here for the panel to discuss. So if you see something you like in particular, be sure to mark it with the heart so that we be sure to see it later on. There are several conditions where you'll receive updates you'll receive notifications of updates to posts and topics. One of them is right here with this speech bubble icon, and that will show you things like I earned my first like and I earned my first flag. I guess that's part of the schizophrenic nature. But you can see things that are happening on the site. Also, if you go to the home page, you'll see a bar here sometimes when topics have been updated. There's also a new tab here where you can see topics that have been updated. So that allows you to keep track of the conversation as well. If you see something that, in particular, that you want to highlight, there's a notification function here with 4 levels. By default, it's set to regular, so you'll only receive a notification if somebody mentions your name. But you can do things like mute a discussion if you're tired of hearing everything about this topic. You can mute it so you won't be notified. You can be tracking a topic, and you can also be watching a topic. And when you're watching a topic, the system will email you a message that says this topic has been updated. And so you'll know if you're not signed into the system in the coming days to come back and see what's been happening. Your browser is in near constant communication with the discussion server, so you don't need to refresh the page. You will see the bubbles here the speech bubble will come up with its notifications. You'll see a blue bar here of updated topics. Those just happen in your browser. You don't need to be refreshing your browser in order to see those. We have several topics. A webcast is breaking up. I'm only getting bits and pieces of your talk. Can you catch on things on your end? It happened yesterday as well. Oh dear. I hope things are better. I hope that was all about the microphone not working. Thank you for posting that. There are several topics here that we've created for this symposium. Each of our speakers has their own topic page, and I encourage you to use this topic page when you want to ask questions of the speaker. The speakers will talk for about 20 minutes or so, and then we'll have a period of 10 minutes or so for questions and answers. So if you have questions specific to John or Stuart, use their topic page. We also have some questions that we thought would be useful seed questions, and you're welcome to look at those and start the discussion there, and we'll bring up your discussion points as we move forward. If you don't see something, if you don't see a place to put your comment, come to the main page and create a new topic. Give it a name here, put your comment or question in here. This creates a new topic, just like that one person did about the webinar audio breaking up. And we'll all see it and be able to comment it, you, the participants in the audience, and then us on the panel. Outside this discussion site, you can also use the hashtag on Twitter, SCHOSS, sustaining culture. I'm blanking on the name of my own symposium right now. Sustainable Cultural Heritage Open Source Software. So I encourage you to use that as well, SCHOSS. And with that, I think I'm going to shift here for a moment. I'm going to return the microphone to the podium. And I wanted to give just a brief summary of what happened yesterday, either to refresh your memory if you were here, to maybe prompt some more discussions, or just to give you an idea, if you weren't here yesterday, the kinds of things that we were talking about. Yesterday we heard from 3 great speakers on the topic of open source software projects and how they can create the conditions for community engagement. What is it that projects can do beyond just putting their source code out there to create a community around that? And as I said, if you missed that yesterday, we're going to get the recording from the Georgia Tech webinar system and post it to YouTube. We also have the presentation slides from Megan and Aviva on their topic pages. So if you wanted to go look at those from yesterday, you can do that. We had a bit of discussion on the FOSS4Lib Discuss site and on Twitter, and I wanted to encourage you to continue that discussion in both places. As I did yesterday as the moderator, I'll weave those questions and comments into the discussion on our panel today. Jenny, I'm sorry. I see that and I'm blanking on it. Jenny's speaker topic page has a thread of discussion that was prompted by Edward Iglesias' posting of an article by Marshall Breeding from the American Library magazine. So go take a look at that. In particular, Jeannie pointed out Marshall's assertion about the popularity of open source in developing nations. And that is true. It's something that I've experienced as well. And I posted a follow-up that links to the EIFL open source group. They've got a great model for bringing together people from an organization. They're all at the same level of understanding about an open source package, and they all come together to learn that package at the same time. So there's already a built-in community of users who understand this, understand about the same things about the package and are learning from each other and are sharing knowledge with each other as they grow as their own little community around an open source package. And I think it's a good model to replicate. Priscilla Kaplan created a new topic with the subject, Remember Notice? Notice, for those in the library community, was a library automation package developed, I think, by the University of Illinois. What's that?
Northwestern.
Oh, Northwestern. Oh, I'm sorry.
That mixed up.
Yes. Give credit where credit is due. There was a time when major automation systems were spun out from the technology of large academic libraries. And she wonders about the parallels between that environment and the open source communities of today. It really dovetails nicely with a comment that Sharon Clapp made yesterday on the discussion site about the profession's collective need to develop long-term skills to sustain the software that it needs. At one time, those skills were resident in major academic libraries because the only thing they could do was write the source code themselves. And then we went through a period of transition where companies blossomed from that. And now we have those companies, we consider them the legacy companies, and open source as a young startup still, but with still the same philosophies that came out of the development and the sharing of those systems from the 1970s. I love Laura Blanchard's tweets during the meeting yesterday, but one in particular sparked a lot of conversation. She said, am I hearing that there might be a place for marketers on an open source team? And that fueled a lot of discussion about, marketers, sure, but what is it that we're marketing? We're not necessarily marketing the open source product. We're marketing some kind of combination of the product and the community and the development methodology and how libraries, when they, again, adopt, and I'll use that term specifically, adopt an open source package, how they participate in the community. How do we market, how do we sell that the adoption of an open source package is not just getting the software, but is also becoming part of the community and becoming an active part of the community. There was a question asked yesterday by the Archivematica Twitter account that I saw only after we had ended our live broadcast. So I created a topic about it on the discussion site, and I hope we get to it today. The Archivematica Twitter account asked, how do we as community leads help link and integrate communities as increasingly institutions' needs overlap in open source solutions? And I think there's something there about the combined interrelatedness of our systems and the common sense to link data together so that we're not entering data twice. But how do we get our communities to talk to each other? What forums are there? And again, I really hope that sparks a discussion too. That's the end of the summary I wanted to present, and now it's my pleasure to introduce the first of our speakers here today. John Bryce has the dual roles of both Library Director for the Meadville Public Library and the Chief Executive Officer of the Crawford County Federated Library System with 9 member libraries. During his 23-year tenure, John has integrated the latest information technology into those 9 rural Crawford County libraries. Starting in 1999 with an internet router project, Crawford County has been using open source solutions in all of its back-end IT infrastructure projects. In 2005, it converted its ILS over to Koha, a fascinating process that we got John to write up in a case study that we'll be posting on the FOSS4Lib site soon. In addition to using open source software, the library system also initiated the LibKey project, a library-oriented kiosk management program, and I'm sure, John, you may be talking about that today. John has written a number of articles about using open source software in small rural libraries, and a link to them is on his bio, on his topic page on the discussion site. And so with that, John.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you for inviting me here. Yesterday we talked about a lot of different things. Can you start the presentation?
That one?
Yeah. Just go to view,
yes.
present. Thank you. Technical details here. Yesterday we spent a lot of time and effort talking about the big concept of community, what an open source community is, how it works from kind of a top-down perspective. And today I thought I'd take some time and explain to you how it actually works from the user experience or from my personal experience running a small rural library system, and kind of tell you the nuts and bolts of things, that why we make decisions a certain way, why we pick certain communities and not others, and how we try to collaborate in the broader spectrum of things. So today's my topic. It's on collaboration. I finished doing the screen or the slide stack, and it was a very dry presentation. I figured I had to do something to spice it up. So what we did was, or what I did was, being an open source program, and since I didn't know where the heck this program was going to end up and who was going to see it, I knew I had to use some type of a graphic that was freely available. So I went to Wikimedia, and I found the cow that you see here on my slide. saying open source movement. And I thought it was kind of appropriate that the cow was being used because we're talking about collaboration. So I just thought it was appropriate. And you'll see certain cows pop up at certain times during the presentation. I run a small library. Actually, it's called a medium-sized library. If you look in the big spectrum of thing, my library is in the 18th percentile, meaning 18% of the libraries in the country are bigger than me, and 82% of the country, or the country's libraries are smaller than I am. But in the library spectrum of things, I'm considered a medium-sized library. We have about 22 employees, and we're located right in downtown Meadville, right next to the park. I live about a mile away at right next to Allegheny College, which is a small community campus that we have. And we run 9 libraries throughout Crawford County, again, a very rural county with a lot of cows and a lot of farming. We're also somewhat known for our tool and die industry. We have a population of about 96,000. So, and we're about the size of Connecticut, or excuse me, Rhode Island. Rhode Island and Crawford County are about the same size. And we get about 190 inches of snow a year. So when we put infrastructure out, we have 8 other libraries throughout the county, we have to make sure it works, because when there's 15, 16 inches of snow coming in that day, you really don't want to have to go out there and service it. So one of the reasons we chose open source was because it was very reliable, and we really rely on that and try to do as many things remotely as possible, which open source is very good at doing. We run a completely open source operation. Every server on those racks is running some type of an open source program. We started with 1 computer in 1991, and from about 91 to about the early 2000s, we were completely a Microsoft and Novell shop. And then starting in 1999, we switched over to using open source software. And the main reason was because of the cost, because of the reliability of the system, and I'll get into that a little bit more in the future of the talk. We have about 33 separate programs we're running right now, and over the years, since about 1999, we've probably had another 20 FOSS projects that we use and subsequently discard or discontinued using. And we have about we service about 175 end clients, and we're in the process of getting our VPN up and running. So very shortly, we'll have our own virtual private network, and everything will be encrypted, and everything will be nice and hidden from everybody else. And we do that all with 3.5 full-time equivalent employees. And none of those employees came from outside of our area. Because of where we live, the rural nature of it, all the snow we get, you basically have to train individuals from our area, because if you're not used to it, they go screaming after the first winter. So we actually trained all of our staff internally. All of my staff have come from local universities, Embro and Clarion University, which are part of the land-grant public or university system up in Pennsylvania. And we've trained our individuals. My head of IT is Cindy Murdoch-Ames. She's a wonderful person, and she does all the work which I get credit for, but she does a wonderful job for us. And her undergraduate degrees she learned everything on the job, her undergraduate degrees in art history. So she has a master's in library science, but her undergraduate degrees in art history, and she does a wonderful job managing all this and making sure all the packages interact and so forth. So it's very much a group effort. People ask me why we spend the type of money that we do on open source instead of using closed source packages. And the bottom line is that we get more bang for the buck with the open source. Over the years, we have spent a considerable amount of money on open source. It's not free. It is free in that you get it for free. However, on the user end of side of things, there's a tremendous investment having to be made on the staff side, on the training side, on the equipment side. And also, if you get into a situation where the program doesn't do what you want it to do, you have to get money or spend money on development. What we found is that usually in the first year, there's very little savings between an open source project and a closed source project. And very little savings. There's savings, but not a tremendous amount of savings between years 2 and 5. However, where the savings really kick in is down the road when you don't have to reinvest money into a new version of a program that the vendor is providing. And that's where the real savings kick in. So we really see our savings in the 5th, 6th, 7th year. Now, we've been using open source since '99. So we're really starting to see savings on top of savings and so forth and so on. People ask me for a rough idea how much we'd spend if we didn't use open source. And probably right now, it's probably around $65,000 a year we're saving and not having to pay licensing fees and so forth and so on. And frankly, I can buy a heck of a lot of personnel in Meadville at that price margin. It's a very economical investment for us to save that money in investment in licensing and invest it in people and in abilities in our organization. What do I look for in a FOSS participation? What's our strategy? And really, when we participate, I want to have an influence on what we're saying. And so I want to be a big fish in a small pond, or a big fish in a medium-sized pond, depending on the size of the project. And so we're very strategic in how we do things. And we have to be strategic because I have limited resources. I mean, I'm a very small library, very small budgets, and we have to make every dollar count for itself. Even when we get into the free programs, the open source programs, we have to make every dollar count. And at the same time, we want to support the idea of open source. So I make sure that whatever open source project we do use, that if they have some type of a paid service or some type of a licensing fee, or they suggest $5 a user or something, that we do pay that. Because I think it's important that even if we don't contribute actively to something, that you contribute to something on a passive level, and invest your money where it could be used by the developers. And frankly, a lot of these projects, these open source projects, are not terribly large ones, some of them, and they could use a few extra bucks or helps that if you're using the program, that you actually help support it in some way. We spend most of our effort on 2 programs. One's called COHA ILS, which got started in New Zealand, and we were just talking about Notice, which, by the way, I used when I was at University of South Florida in Tampa back in the mid-'80s. And that was like a top-down, really big library coming up with a ILS based on, I think it was built in machine code or machine language. Assembler, yeah, assembler, yeah. And so COHA actually is from the opposite side of things. COHA was originally started in New Zealand as a Y2K project by a library system about 1/4 the size of Crawford County. Very small library system in New Zealand. And they just had to get something done. And if you talk to the original programmer, he named the first package, the core code, as C4 because they had 3 months to get the program done or everything was just going to blow up. So even today, the main source code of COHA is called C4. And so it's kind of interesting that from our perspective, we're using an ILS that kind of has a bottom-up type of a genesis. And I'll talk more about that as I go along here. And then the other program that we personally developed ourselves is a time management program called LibKey. And it actually ties into COHA or any ILS that uses SIP2. And it provides patron authentication, patron rationing of time, and a kiosk. It serves up kiosk programs for patrons, so staff doesn't have to manage the internet connections. Right now, we don't quite know how many libraries are using it, which is a problem with open source, but we're pretty much think it's around 400 libraries across the country and in the Caribbean, because I visited a couple of libraries in the Caribbean, and they were using it also. How did we develop this philosophy or guidelines for using open source? And frankly, a lot of it just had to do because I had a project and I was in trouble. I promised my funding providers that I would provide a automatic internet log-on system for all of our smaller libraries back in '99, and this was before broadband. We were actually using dial-up connections, and I had to have a little dial-up computer and a little firewall, and it was going to cost $27,500 for 7 libraries. I didn't have $27,500. And so basically, I hired an individual who worked for one of my librarians, or was married to one of my librarians. He was a professor out at Edinburgh University, a meteorology professor, had learned Linux because he wanted to run a weather station in his house. And we hired him. Well, actually, I asked him to help out. He did this project for free. And we bought a whole bunch of old Compact 40 or Compact 46s, ripped out the hard drives for $40, and found an operating system, a Linux operating system, and programmed that. It was called I think it was called Tiny Linux, and it ran on a floppy disk. And we booted the systems off the floppy, put a modem in it, and bam, wham, we were done. And the total cost of the project was basically about $400. After that, I found out maybe open source is something we got to take a longer, harder look at. So since then, any project we've done, we've always evaluated to see if there was an open source option. And because we keep building on our knowledge and experience, it's easier for us now to do open source than it is to do some type of a closed source solution. And actually, when we find that there's only a closed source solution available, we usually start thinking that maybe we should, if it's possible, develop ourselves, or think of some other solution besides using a closed source. I don't think we have any closed source programs right now outside of some video editing stuff from Apple. One thing we really like about open source is you can test drive the stuff. With Koha, we had a really complicated conversion because we were using an old DOS ILS Winnebago, and we had to switch that over to Koha. We actually ran 47 different types of, or 47 versions of downloading it. We practiced 47 times downloading the software, or the MARC records from Koha, or from Winnebago into Koha. And that really eliminated all the question marks about when, what would happen when we did that. And you can't do that with a closed source type of solution. And I'm real proud of the fact that we're kind of considered the DIY library. I mean, we build our own furniture, believe it or not. We build additions onto the building using my maintenance staff. If we can save a dime by doing something ourselves, we always evaluate that and see if we like to do it that way. So when you put all those things together, open source really became not only an option, but our primary option when we go forward trying to develop new projects. How do we select open source software? Well, we look at a number of different things. There's always the technical thing. We're real comfortable using Perl and PHP. A number of programs were mentioned yesterday, projects that use Ruby on Rails. We use some of that. We also look at what licenses does it use. We want something that's completely open source. We've run into problems in the past where something looked like it was open source, but when you dug into it, it wasn't. So we've kind of, we steer away from those types of projects now. And then we look at the community. I mean, it's not our first consideration. Of course, it's not our lowest consideration, but you always do look at the community. And we've dealt from everything from a single user in the mom's basement to multiple developers in the Fortune 500. I mean, you have to realize that there is no model of what a user community should be and how many people need to be in it. No ratio that is out there. It's just a spectrum. And you just kind of have to judge about how big is the project, what kind of support are we going to need from this project once we get it up and running, how often does a new version come out, and that's all the stuff that the community is involved in. And we look at that, and if we like it, we continue. If there's an issue, we see if there's other options. In many cases, sometimes there's only 1 or 2 or 3 options, so you have to select the best one out of a very small population sample. So that has some consideration also. And I mentioned earlier, most of the time we don't actively participate in the community unless we find something wrong. There's been a number of times where we have found a bug or fixed a bug, and we make sure we pass that on to the community. And then, like I said earlier, we always seem to contribute, or we always contribute to the project if they ask for people to do so. On the active side, I mean, there's a lot of things that can be done, and we've done all these things more or less, myself or my staff have done these over the years. And it's just not writing code. I mean, really, there's a lot of steps and a lot of things that need to be done in an open source project, you know, everything from developing documentation to submitting new features. And it doesn't have to be done by a programmer. I mean, I do have one on staff developer, but the rest of our IT department, myself, we're just individuals who can sometimes look at code and see something, but in many cases, we're not coders. But we contribute in any way we can. And over the years, we've gotten pretty good at finding bugs, especially Cindy has gotten good at finding bugs. And actually fixing bugs. If she can find it, she can usually fix it. You know, that's usually the big things, the bug. And then if you want to get some you know, earn your bones, so to speak, in a community, you know, if you can sign off on quality assurance, especially with COHA, there are always hundreds of quality assurance projects that need to be done to further the integration of new code into the project. And quality assurance is always something that they're always looking to do, and that does not require a coder to do it. Anybody can do it with the proper training and assistance. This here is a picture of our first Hackfest I ever attended. I was in a kind of a bind again. I'd given a company $60,000 to put an indexing system into Koha. And they came back to me saying, well, we put the indexing system in, but there's some coding that needs to be done, and we're not quite sure how to do it. But we're going to have a Hackfest. Why don't you come to the Hackfest, bring your programmer with you, and we'll work it out there. Well, of course, the Hackfest was in Marseille, France. So I ended up having to spend a week in Marseille. It was tough work. And we got the problem resolved, and everything worked out fine. I still am director of the Meadville Public Library, thank goodness. But this here is a picture of all the individuals that were really the key players at the beginning part of Koha. The second person from the top there is Chris. He's the guy, the actual programmer. The next guy is Paul. He was one of the big programmers in France, and he did a lot of the programming for the MARC module. Then it's myself, and then Cindy from my library, and then somebody from a company which I won't name right now because they kind of split the community, so we won't mention their name, but she was very instrumental in doing a lot of the original documentation. That kind of gives you an idea of how these meetings work. It's not all programmers, it's everybody coming together and contributing. I've attended a number of different Hackfests over the years, Edinburgh and Reno. Not getting to Argentina this year. They have one in Argentina this year, but I won't be attending that one. But usually my job at the Hackfest is I have a real important job. I run the bulletin board. I manage to write everything down, the important points, and then I make sure everybody prioritizes and gets the information down on the sheets, because they have these great conversations, but if you don't record the conversations, you can't move forward. So my contribution might be small, but in the overall terms of the project, it's important that we keep the conversations going and record them for future use and use. And this just gives you a list of the type of people that you'll find at a Hackfest or some type of an open source community. And you know, the least important ones, of course, the second from the bottom, they're the library management types. They just kind of gunk up the works most of the time. But yeah, how do you influence an open source community, especially from the user's perspective? And I tell you, that was one of the most frustrating things that I had to deal with over the years, because, you know, in essence, my organization contributed a lot to Koha, especially in the beginning. And we also contributed a lot of our time and effort to the program. However, my developer was not necessarily getting his additions putting into the program. And it took a good 4 to 5 years for us to form the proper personal interconnections to foster that type of getting our changes into the program that we needed to get done. And it's just the type of thing, every project's different, the politics inside the projects are different, how you interact with everybody's different, so really it's really a question of getting to know the community and working with the community as much as possible. And that's what we found. And it's, you know, it pays off, but it's not a fast process. And just because you write a big check and you think you're going to have a major contribution in the future, that's not necessarily so. It's much more of an interpersonal type of a thing. And what type of things does the staff have to do? And you can see there that anybody really on your staff can contribute to open source. It really is more of the political will from within the organization, and much more so than the resources that you have. I am sure there's some type of resource in any organization that would be very much welcomed on an open source level. It's just to make communicating that you're available and willing to help. People ask me all the time, why do you host your own solutions instead of having another company do it for you? And frankly, when we got started back in '99, there really wasn't anybody doing hosting. We got started before the major COA companies in the United States got started. We also, were pretty much on our own for many years. Even prior to that, we had done a lot of open source projects before COA. So we were just used to hosting things ourselves. We know how to run a data center, and we're comfortable doing that ourselves. And we just find that we like the control and being able to being in control of our own environment. And we also like the savings that it instills. It's the cheapest way for us to operate, and that's the way we'll do it. Other organizations are going to have different priorities, and it's going to be a different solution for them, but for us it works. And we don't mind supporting our own software. We've been doing it for many years, and we found out that we're pretty good at it. And now we're training other organizations, and we've had contracts with other organizations to help them learn what we've done. So we're now to the point where we're actually helping other organizations replicate what we do. And it's not necessarily a solution for everybody, but it's a solution that works best for us. And there's no right or wrong answer here. I mean, you can always go out and hire somebody to do the work for you. A couple of times when we got to first start with Koha, we did actually have a company that we did, we hosted it ourselves, but we had a company where we had an agreement with them where they would answer our questions and support. If we had questions, we'd go to them with our questions. What we found out is that in most cases, we were faster in fixing the problem than they were. And so after 2 years, we cut that relationship. Just because we found out that we didn't need it. It was a belt and suspender type of approach, and we found out that we didn't need that type of a net to work with. With open source, we like doing a proof of concept first, and then we do an alpha version, go on to the purchasing of hardware. We always spend more money on hardware than most people do because we don't have any licensing costs involved, so we always buy the best hardware that we can get and always over-engineer it. And then go on to a beta, go to production, and then we debug the damn thing. It works. Hopefully it'll work. With Koha, we decided to add our own features to it. And so we actually came up with our own version of Koha, which can be a whole nother talk. But basically, the things we added were like fines and clubs and services and all that good stuff. The clubs and services was really cool because we could actually define subgroups within our patron community. For example, those individuals who want to belong to the science fiction club, or those individuals who want to belong to the children's summer reading club, and then track their usage and communicate with them specifically about those clubs and services. So all those were very important features for us. What we found out, though, was that down the road, you can see my little cow here turned into some type of a creature. That's how our Koha version ended up. And we ended up with a situation where we were running our own Git depository and basically having to recode the program every time there was an update, which was too much work for us to do. So we were skipping. It was very difficult for us to upgrade. So we ended up doing is working with the community. And a lot of the changes we made, the whole community didn't want. But somebody else did. So what we ended up doing was proposing to the community that we put in a plug-in architecture to Koha, so that if you have a small program that you want to add to it, but your library, only 10 libraries want to do that, you could put in the plug-in. So our programmer or developer, Kyle Hall, he designed the plug-in. That got accepted by Koha. And so all these little things that we've done over the years have now become plug-ins. So now we're to the stage where we can actually start using mainline Koha and using plug-ins and get the same capability without having to run our own Git depository. No matter what happens, you can test the heck out of whatever you're doing, but sometimes you just don't, when you get into production, you're going to find problems. When we first started using Koha, we found out that 39 books were not being searched properly because they had the word "not" in it. And it turned out it wasn't a problem with Koha, it was a problem with index data, Zebra index. And so we actually had to go, we talked to the Koha people, and they kept pointing their fingers to index data. Index data kept pointing fingers to Koha. So it took us about 2 or 3 days to track it down. Once we did, it was just changing one value in one area. I remember the value was 0, and I think we changed it to 1, I think. And that eliminated the problem. But it took 2 days for us to find the situation corrected. But we did correct it ourselves, and figure out you have a problem and resolve it within 2 days is actually pretty good for any type of a computer system, I think. So it's important for the staff to have some type of a feedback system. We use the Mantis program. There's going to be frustration no matter when you change something, especially in ILS, over to the public. And we really believe that they have to have a way of communicating directly to the IT staff and to management. So we try to communicate everything through the Mantis, all the bugs and so forth and so on, so that we can track that and create tickets and manage everything through that. And then you need supportive management when things go wrong. One of the reasons we're successful in Crawford County is because I'm the top manager there for both the system and Meadville, and I firmly believe this, and I know we can make it work right. Not every system, every project, every library is set up in such a way. And you really need the support of upper management, because things can go wrong, and they can go wrong quickly, and they can go wrong in a way you don't expect them, no matter how good and how many things you test. And you really need the support of upper management for a project to work. And I've talked to a number of libraries that have had failed open source projects. They usually give me a call after they fail, not before. They ask for advice. They always call me afterwards, it seems. And the big problem seems to be that someplace in management there was a breakdown. And so I can't reiterate enough that if you're a director or if you're thinking of doing a project, you have to get the upper management. And I know different organizations have different management structures. But you have to get everybody on board at the upper levels, because if it's somebody in the right spot doesn't like what's going on, they'll find a reason to shut you down. So you got to have to be able to expect you're going to get supported by upper management. And we talked about hosting, or somebody asked a question on the side about hosting and support issues when you self-host. And really, we have found that self-hosting ourselves works very well. As you can see on the screen there, if you have a problem, somebody, chances are, already had the same problem. And if they haven't, you can pretty much, if you do a little digging and ask people the right questions, you can find the person that actually wrote that portion of the code. And you can communicate them either through an IRC channel or through email, or even on the phone. God forbid that they actually answer it. But there's usually some type of a place where you can actually communicate someplace with the actual developer who developed that portion of the code. And that usually helps find the core issue and get you back up and running pretty quickly. I wrote a real long article along with Kyle Hall and Cindy Murdoch about how we developed the libkey system. And it's at meadvillelibrary.org/OS. And it's on Web4Lib on their site, so anybody can read it. And a lot of my friends in the community up in Pennsylvania read the article. And one of them said to me that it was kind of an interesting question. She said that, how did you know when you went into writing a program to do something that was going to succeed? I mean, she says, what would have happened if it hadn't succeeded? I says, well, we would have dealt with it. To me, that question never came up in my mind. If we have a problem, we go forward, we fix it ourselves. I never thought that we'd fail at it, or if we did fail, what was our backup position? Because I knew my staff and myself were smart enough, and we have enough gumption, I guess is the proper word. I don't know if it's a word or not, but we trust our abilities enough that we knew we could be able to figure it out. But there's a lot of people that don't feel that way in library world, in public library world, rural Pennsylvania library world. And a lot of them think using open source is very, very risky, and it could be very, very scary. And so that's why I put that one up there. Courage is being scared to death, but saddling up anyway. John Wayne said that. And really, it takes a little bit of courage to do this, especially if you're using a big project. Doing a big project using open source. And I think as a community, we have to realize that from a manager's perspective or director's perspective, that for them, this is a very, this is something that's out of the ordinary. This is something that's not currently taught very well. It's in library schools. Using open source is a route less taken. And so I think when we start philosophizing about how a community works, that needs to be taken into account by the community. And I've had some thoughts about that over the years, and maybe I can share that with you later about what I think about that in the discussion. So, you know, it's like buying a new car. Two people can buy exactly the same car, and one person gets 34 miles a gallon, the guy next door gets 28. You know, is it because the guy next door, or the guy gets less mileage, hits the accelerator more often? Is it because there's something wrong with the car? Is it because, you know, he has a different route and from the guy that gets 34 miles a gallon? We don't know. And that's true. You can have two exactly the same libraries, put in exactly the same programming, or same program, and get two very, very different results from it. And that's especially true in open source because it relies on the skills and abilities of the organization implementing it much more so than a vendor situation. So any open source project, your mileage is going to vary. And it's going to be anywhere from, you know, you're going to get fantastic mileage to you're going to wonder why the heck you did it. But from our experience, we found that it's worked out very, very well for us. Again, if you're interested in all of our articles, and we have stuff that goes back to the beginning in 1999 with presentations and so forth, all the way up to what we're doing currently. It's at meadvillelibrary.org/OS. And I thank you for paying attention to me.
Thank you. Had a few questions come in for you. Okay, click your microphone on if you will. Do the same here.
It's on green.
No, hit it again. Bright green. There we go.
Okay.
A lot of people are reflecting on the do-it-yourself nature of your library, and you know, maybe because it's combined with its rural nature and 190 inches of snow. Can you talk a little bit more about that $65,000 a year in savings that you're seeing by not using licensing proprietary software, and how was that a conscious decision, or how did you go about reinvesting that?
Well, the reinvestment part's the easiest part. I mean, all that money goes to the IT department. It either gets spent for personnel or for new equipment. Mm-hmm. So, you know, we invest the money almost immediately in that area. How I came up with the $65,000 figure is basically I estimate how many packages we have, how many clients we have, put an average in for how much it would cost per license, came up with a figure, and then I figured out what it would cost us for a yearly ILS license. For a library our size, it would run anywhere from, or a system our size would run anywhere from $15,000 probably to $20,000 a year. Mm-hmm. So you add those two numbers up, that's how I came up with the $65,000. It's very much an estimate. If I had to go out and buy things today, I would have probably much more investment in having it right from the start. Mm-hmm. And so I shudder to think what it would cost me to reinvest to go, you know, from a blank slate to a completely new infrastructure again. And you know, the nice thing about this is when we invest money, we invest it in the hardware, we invest it in the people. We invest it where people actually see it, the patrons actually see those investments. So you go into our library, and I should have brought some internal pictures. You know, we have all new equipment. You know, you don't see a 10 or a 12-year-old computer out there. You see a brand new, you know, monitor with brand new keyboard with, you know, it's thin client architecture. We use thin client architecture, but you know, you don't even see the computer. We have the computers mounted underneath the desks, so they're completely hidden. So you know, all the public sees is what they need to see and what they need to use. And we've been using open source for the public now since 2002, and they come to the or they go up to a computer screen, they type in the libkey, and boom. A computer comes up, or the screen comes up, and it's got icons on it. They click on the icons, and it works just like any other computer. So I mean, I think from the patron perspective, it works out pretty well that way. As for the DIY aspects, I know most librarians don't like that, but it's just the nature of how we are and how we operate, and because of the budgets, it just makes our dollars go further.
Laura Blanchard's been doing a great job summarizing your talk in tweets, and
okay.
So and there have been people that have been tweeting and retweeting those. But you know, one that she said kind of triggered this question in my mind. She summarized you as saying to get the most out of open source software, get to know the open source community and see where you can contribute. Do you have a particular plan or pattern or mindset when you approach a new community? You know, that since you've done it a number of times now, is it rote for you, or is it different each time?
No, it's different each time because you got different individuals involved with it each time. Yeah, we found that each community has a different perspective. Like Koha is very much tuned to getting new features put in and getting QA done and pushing things as much as possible. Whereas on the LibKey type of things, we found that we're much more talking to our users, since we kind of control the community, and trying to get development dollars in to put new features in. So it's a different type of a perspective, I guess. And we've contributed to some of the larger projects too, and there you just try to contribute and stay out of everybody else's way. So every project is a little different, but we have found that with Koha, that the personal approach and having to basically start at the bottom and do the QA and talking to people and doing some of the grunt work really goes a long way to helping out the total project.
Since you've built a lot of the staff from just your surrounding community, and trained them up in this area, they probably don't come to you knowing about open source software or the community philosophy or anything like that. Are there characteristics that you know to look for now in people that help them to understand what it is that you're trying to do?
Yeah, well, I put that second to last line in there for a reason, stubborn. You have to have people who are kind of stubborn, that are good at solving puzzles. Cindy is really good at puzzles and games. And you have to have a streak in there that we're going to make this work one way or the other. Because there's going to be times when you're doing it and you're just going to get frustrated to no end. I mean, it's just not like an hour of frustration or 2 hours. It could be a week or 10 days or 2 weeks of frustration. And you got the director coming down complaining, why isn't this working? And so, from my perspective, I've got to give everybody enough time and leeway to do this. And I didn't mention it here, but when we do an open source project, we're really loose on the final deadline. We don't have drop-dead deadlines that has to be done by this date. We pretty much give ourselves a window of getting it done, and if we miss that window, we know there's going to be another window, within 2 or 3 or 6 months from that time period. Because we've just you've run into unexpected issues, and if you try to do development and open source development on a schedule, you're going to end up getting burned at some point. So you want to make sure that I would much rather have a reliable system in place and running 2 months or 3 months late than having something that's going to cause a lot of issues in production. So I have 9 libraries, and 7 of them are very small and very rural, and they can't handle change very well. So you want to make sure that the changes that do come are improvements over what you have currently.
Well, and I think that's echoing a good point, because you describe yourself as having this dual role. So you have the library director role, where in your library you have a great deal of influence over what happens. But you also have this role as the executive director of the regional system. So in that respect, you're accountable to the other library directors.
Right.
So what, without revealing confidence of your conversation with other library directors, I think it would be useful for the participants to know what those conversations are like and how you communicate. We're going to take this untested path, and it's going to be okay to those other library directors.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of politics that get involved in this, and there's a lot of conversations, and it's just not the librarians you have to deal with. You also have to deal with people who are on the library board, some of them who have never used computers, or more or less in many instances. So you have to have a lot of conversations. The COLA conversation, and it's in the article that Peter mentioned, and I don't want to go because it's a fairly long story. But basically, it was a 2.5-year process of convincing people and demonstrating what we could do and telling them that this could get done. And you have to remember that we did not do the ILS as our first project. The ILS was actually one of our later projects. And so we had built up a track record of getting projects done and getting open source out into the smaller rural libraries So I think that track.
Before you tackle the ILS.
And
yeah.
people have come to me and says, what experience can you have, we're moving to an ILS, what can you help? I says, do something else before you do the ILS. Because getting that little bit of experience is so crucial that will help you doing an ILS. And doing an open source ILS as your first project is extremely challenging and extremely risky, at least from my perspective.
Richard Millette asks, rather than continuing to maintain your own data center, have you considered moving to cloud infrastructure?
We've looked at it. One of the issues we have is because of our rural nature that the number of hops trying to get to our libraries gets to be very challenging. We have to deal with 3 separate companies for our broadband support. And I'm afraid that if we go to a bigger community, we would be hard pressed for us to keep the level of connectivity that we have right now, the speed. When we first looked at Meadville and Sagertown, we're 5 miles apart. But we found out that it was taking 12 to 14 seconds to do one transaction. We found out there was 15 hops involved between going those 8 miles. And, it took us and the telephone company and a cable company about 2 days to figure out how we could do it and run the wires in such a way that it became milliseconds.
Yeah.
And frankly, just because of real nature, I like that type of control. And frankly, until the hacking's getting worse. But as long as we can keep the system secure, I think we'll keep to with that architecture for the near future.
Okay. Grace Dunbar from Equinox also has a comment on your post where she talks about the experience of her clients. And of course, Equinox is a hosting and supporting
They support
provider
Koha.
of Koha and Evergreen. So, and her point was it's still possible to save even with a fully hosted solution.
Well, yeah.
But your mileage varies.
Yeah, your mileage varies. And I was involved with the PALS group in Pennsylvania where 30-some libraries have come together as a consortium. And Equinox has the contract on that. And when we got the bids in from both the hosted or the closed and open source hosted solutions, there was a significant difference of 40 to 45% between the closed source and the open source solutions. So yeah, you're going to save money. We got started doing it this way. I have the capability built up with my staff doing it this way. So it's actually the path of least resistance for us.
Yeah, this question didn't come up yesterday, which was kind of interesting, but you're in this dual role of both adopter and creator of open source. What kind of open source licenses do you prefer? What licenses have you found that weren't really open or really in the ethos that you were promoting?
You're getting into an area that's more Cindy's and Kyle's area, and I would have to respond to that.
We'll ask them, to sign up.
I'll ask that question, get a response to you, because I really want to be very careful when I say there, and they have a lot more experience in that area than I do. I do know we have gotten burned where somebody says it was an open source license, and you read the fine prints and it's not. And that's one of the reasons we had to write libkey, because we start with an old open source solution, and the pieces just weren't there open source. So that's the reason we wrote it, because I just couldn't find an open source project with the right license. But I will get back and answer that online.
Very good. And a final question, we have to ask where the cows came from. Tell the cow story.
Well, the cows came from, I was doing the presentation, and it needed some spicing up. So I went to Wikimedia, and somebody did a program on collaboration about open source, and they asked all the participants to make a cow. And that's some of the ones you see are up there. There's about 60-some different cows you can pick from for your own collaboration project. So feel free to use them at any point you want to. I know it was utterly ridiculous, but I couldn't help myself.
Thank you, John. Open source art as well. We're going to switch gears here to Stuart Miller, and it's my pleasure to introduce you, Stuart. Stuart has been the library systems analyst at the University of Chicago Library since 2001. His work experience includes 11 years as a special librarian for a professional membership association, followed by various positions in documentation, customer support, systems analysis and marketing communications for, oh, notice, Endeavor Information Systems, and March 1st. Stuart began working as a subject matter expert and analyst for Koali Ole in 2010, a community source ILS developed by a partnership of several academic libraries. And recently helped bring Ole into production at Chicago. Stuart was part of the team that wrote another fascinating open source case study that we will be posting on the FOSS for Lib site here shortly. Stuart, please.
Thank you. I don't have any cows. This is the standard format for anyone doing a presentation. As a University of Chicago representative, this was given to us by our communications manager, so I'm being a very good corporate citizen by just using this. If you're in the library world, you'll know that there are very clear, I don't know how to call it, very clear beliefs that large academic research libraries are completely different from public libraries, and that the only thing they sometimes share is the name library. And it is true, they have different priorities, which is why historically, if you look at software developed for libraries, the vendors who have been successful are the ones who focused either on the academic research libraries or the public. But what struck me today as I was listening to the previous presentation was what you'll hear me saying will echo what you've just heard, because the experience with open source is very much its own thing, and I think it's kind of interesting that the kinds of experiences you just heard described in a reasonably small public library are going to be the same in a large academic. So it's kind of interesting, and so maybe you won't hear anything you haven't already heard. So I'll run that risk. The topic, what does it mean to adopt an open source package, does not really have any easy or simple answers. And it's my experience that every organization, just like you've heard in the small public library, whether it's big or small, whether it's public or private, whether it's for-profit or non-profit, each of these places has its own kind of culture and policies. And that will, to a great extent, I think, influence how you experience open source, just like it influences how you experience proprietary software. So I do think that a lot of what will happen if you go to open source really is a reflection of what your situation and that organization is really all about. And I just want to highlight a few things as I talk about our experiences where I think that comes into play. Before I go any further, and I realize I may be beating a dead horse here, but I just wanted to very briefly review with you what I think of as open source and also its close cousin, community source. Here are some of the common characteristics of open source. These are probably already familiar to you. If you're a non-technical person and you are interested in finding out more about software topics, I can only say that a really good place to start is Wikipedia. If you go to Wikipedia, for example, and type in open source, you'll really get a very comprehensible article that will explain what open source is, how it sort of came about, and some of the significant developments that have happened in the past several years. It's a really good place to start on almost any technical topic if you're a non-technical person. I want to point out on this slide, though, the points 4 and 5 I think are the most germane to our discussion today. Many users feel that open source is the result of developing software in a manner where user requirements are paramount, not mediated or filtered or diminished by commercial marketplace demands for profitability or other non-user related goals. And that focus needs to be maintained through the continuing active participation of these users in all future development. And I think those are two key concepts to keep in mind. Community source indicates that there is an organization or entity of some kind that exists to develop and promote the use of an open source package. As described in this quote, again from Wikipedia, but it's a good shorthand description of what it means. These organizations have members, and I put the word members in quotation marks because it means different things in different situations. And those members of these communities are the users of the software. But not all users, of course, need to be members of that community. And we'll talk more about this as a reflection, again, building on what has been said before. Some level, if you want to be considered a member of an open source or a community source software community, it means that you have to have some level of membership or participation in the organization that generally supports the use and future development of the product. Such communities are often, but not always, organized as nonprofit membership foundations or organizations, or the tax-exempt IRS 50, whatever the 501c3, whatever that is. And those organizations in themselves may have full-time staff who coordinate and manage aspects of software development. But the members of that community or the members of that organizations are the ones who actually define requirements, develop the code, test new features and functions, write documentation and training materials, keep the software compatible with all applicable standards and protocols, and so forth and so on. In fact, it's the members that take ownership of all of the things that have to do with developing software. Because it isn't just coding. It's someone has to write requirements. Someone needs to say what are the acceptance criteria. Someone needs to develop test scripts from that. Somebody needs to run the test scripts. Somebody needs to write the documentation, and so on and so forth. And all of the community organizations that support these software packages have done this to varying levels of success or failure, if you will, depending on the organization. I think all of these community organizations share the same mission and goals, which is basically to promote and extend the use of their software. But the details of their governance, the membership, the operations are all going to vary, and some are much more mature and formally structured than others. Just to point out some contrasts, my library has adopted the Quali OLE package, which is, OLE stands for Open Library Environment. If you want to know what Quali stands for, just go look it up online. It's very typically academic, what can I say? But the Quali Foundation is actually a foundation which is devoted to promoting open source software for use in academic institutions. And there is a Quali student registration, there's a Quali financial management, there's a Quali research management package, several projects, all of which are intended to be used primarily by academic institutions. And we are the group that developed basically what's typically called in the business the integrated library system, which is Quali OLE. It has a very formal structure. If you want to be part of the community that actively works on the development, you have to join the project as a development partner. That requires a membership fee from whoever is joining. Then, if your parent organization is not already a member of the Quali Foundation itself, the library needs to pay a fee to become a member of the foundation. There's a governance structure in place. If a library decides it wants to join as a development partner, then that library's director automatically becomes a member of the project's board of directors. That library then would also have the ability to assign a person as a member of what's called the functional council and a member of what's called the technical council. And these are the two bodies that basically monitor and approve or prioritize what we're really going to do with the software. There are also then reporting to that group subject matter expert groups, which focus on such things as acquisition, circulation, cataloging, who are the people that sit down and hash out and write requirements, develop the test scripts, run tests, and so forth and so on. And if a library becomes a development partner of Quali OLE, then they are encouraged, although not required, to have their own members of their staff work with these subject matter expert groups. Because the whole point, again, is getting as close to your user and his or her needs as possible. Now, Quali OLE is a little bit different than some of the other open source projects because we decided that instead of using programmers at the development partner member level to actually do the coding, we actually used membership fees and grant money, again from Andrew Mellon, to actually hire a company to do our coding for us. So we hired a company called HTC Global Services, which has done all of our coding. That's a little unusual. Most open source or community source tend to rely on people at the institutions that plan to use that software. But that isn't always the case. Now, just to so you can see, there's pretty formal structure. It's pretty cut and dried in a sense. I mean, we're still trying to work out how some of these things should all work together. We finally had to realize that one of the subject matter expert groups had to be what we call a cross-module group, because there are features and functions within an integrated library system that do not belong to any one group or function. They cross over. So we needed a group that could look at the system as a whole and say, okay, these are the things that affect everybody, so what are we going to do about them? And that group, for example, is looking at our search interface, things like that everybody would use. Now, to give you a contrast to that, the other major open source product that the library has adopted is ViewFind, which is one of several open source user interfaces which you can hook up to your integrated library system for the use of your end users. We have chosen ViewFind. Now, ViewFind was developed at Villanova University's Falvey Memorial, I think I've got that name right, Falvey Memorial Library. And it became a community source when it started inviting others to get involved. I mean, the original genesis was that Villanova did not like any of the online user interfaces that it could buy, so it developed its own and gave it out as open source, and then a community has grown around it. Villanova still supports whatever infrastructure that project requires, which essentially is a website where you can download the software and other information. They host an annual meeting of those who are working on ViewFind development projects. They have one of those days is a hack fest, but that's it. Basically, if you want to participate, you show up. If you want to participate, you start attending bi-weekly phone calls, which the number is posted out there on their website. And if you have someone in your library that wants to get involved in helping develop ViewFind, you just start attending those bi-weekly calls. And at some point, someone in your library might be interested in doing a development project for that, and presumably if the library feels that it's important enough, they'll give their blessing to be done on staff time. But it's a completely different kind of situation than with Qualio Lay, which is much more structured and formal. And also, there's no charge for ViewFind. You just start. You don't have to pay anything to be involved as a development partner, you just are. So it's very, very different. And I think those kind of represent two extremes in the open source community, and you can find everything in between. So all of them are different. So we've decided to go ahead and put in Qualio Lay and ViewFind. And basically, if that's your situation in any organization, there's kind of two things you really have to decide on. And as we've heard before, that's basically, are you going to need support for any of these products that you're going to use? And that question is really the same whether or not you put in proprietary software or open source, because you can get support for either group. And the other decision, which is kind of unique to you when you start using open source, is whether or not you want to be an active member of that community. To give you an example, Qualio Lay and ViewFind are both individual packages, and each one of them uses or utilizes other open source packages. So this is sort of just a partial list of all of the open source products that are involved with bringing up Qualio Lay and bringing up ViewFind. And I have put on this slide the name of the formal organization that exists that represents the membership community for that particular software. And you can see there are quite a few here. This also very nicely illustrates how a lot of open source and community source software gets done, because what they use are other open source products and tools. And you'll notice that there are several tools and frameworks here that are involved by the which are used by the developers that are all open source. You will also notice that many of these organizations are not for profit. although that isn't always the case. And the notable exception on this particular list is that both Java and MySQL, which are open source, are actually run and distributed through Oracle, which is very much a for-profit organization. But they have taken on those open source products for their own reasons, and that those that were inherent, at least Java, of course, came from Sun, which Oracle purchased. And notice that there are 8 different organizations here for 11 different communities. That's quite a lot, and that's just not even the full list. So the question becomes, well, number one, do I need to buy support for every single one of these? And then the second question is, do I need to become an active community member for all of these? And I think the simple and short answer is no. And the more complex or longer answer is, as you might guess from what you've heard before, it depends. So I want to talk briefly first about buying support for any of these things. And again, this tends to come into play with your organization's culture and general approach to information technology. If your approach has always been to outsource as much as you possibly can because for your situation that's perhaps the most economical, or your approach has been the opposite, that you want to have everything in-house because you can completely control your own destiny, that might well inform how you're going to buy support, whether it's open source or whether it's proprietary. And you can buy the support for any open source product just like you can buy the support for any proprietary product. Of course, you know, what happens often, budget is what dictates your corporate culture or your policy, and that's always a consideration. However, it may also be that if you decide to go with open source, maybe that gives your organization an opportunity to look at its culture and say, okay, is it now time to make a dramatic change? Maybe your experience with doing everything out of house has not been a good one, and you want to control your own destiny, and so you're going to use open source as a way of doing that. Or maybe the opposite is true. Maybe you've run your everything in-house and it's become prohibitively expensive for you, and you think it would be more economical to get someone to do it for you. So either way, you can do it, and you may wish to try to use open source arriving on your doorstep as a way of changing that culture. I think what's unique, though, to the open source and community source community are the questions: who provides this support and what does it cost? One of the presumed benefits of open source is that there will be competition for your support dollars. With proprietary software, the only support option is typically the software vendor. With open or community source, any vendor can decide to offer services for the software, and this ideally creates competition, which in theory at least should lead to lower prices. So while you may have to do a little more homework, because with proprietary software you've got the vendor, there's no other choice, so you may have to shop around a bit, but you're probably going to get a better deal. It should be pointed out that proprietary vendors often offer different packages at different price levels, but even so, you're still only stuck with the one vendor. And open and community source certainly allows you more choice when it comes to buying support. And later on in my slides, I'll show you the links. There are 2 lists: one of the those entities that offer support for ViewFind, and those that are offering support for Koali-Olé. And it's interesting, even though Koali-Olé is only just now becoming available, we are one of 2 first implementers this last August. There are already 3 support vendors for Koali-Olé. So that shows you that they're really, I mean, people see opportunities and will step in and start offering. And I should mention, by the way, the standard disclaimer that my mention of any company name, organization, or commercial vendor is in no way either an endorsement or a recommendation by me or the University of Chicago Library. So I've done my due diligence. And of course, when it comes to support, as it has always been, you can pick and choose what you buy support for. Most organizations, for example, pay for operating system support simply because it often comes as part of an agreement with this hardware service. In libraries, often the parent organization has a license for an operating system which might apply to any application that needs to use it. So the library may pay nothing or may only pay its share. It's also possible that you will mix and match. You might decide it's worth it to pay someone to do the installation and initial configuration and train you as to what they've done. And then you'll take it from there. Or maybe you just want to buy some training if it's a specific package that's going to be used for specific purposes. So you can mix and match these in any way you like. I think the point is, again, that whether it's proprietary or open community source software, you have support options and you need to make the same decisions as you've always made when it comes to installing new systems. As opposed to support, deciding on whether or not your organization needs to commit to active membership in an open source community is definitely unique to the software you have and to your organization. Participation in such a community can involve far more than it used to be when you may have been a member of a user group for a commercial product. That kind of operation is very different from what it means to be an active member in a open source community. Again, I think, as was alluded to before, your organization either has this kind of interest or sometimes it doesn't. And so you are going to be making decisions based on what typically you've always been comfortable doing in your library, and you can continue to do that with open source. Active membership in some of these communities does mean that sometimes there's a financial commitment, like I described with Quali-Ole. And maybe it's not possible for you to meet that financial commitment. And so you're not going to be actively involved. You maybe become a user because anybody can have the software, but you may not be directly involved in the development efforts. Active membership in ViewFind, as I just described, is essentially means just standing up and saying, I want to be involved, and you can be. Now again, this kind of depends on what your organization is. If you see that a programmer in your group could do a ViewFind coding project, and it might take that person 2 months to do it, presumably the management of the library would have to say, yeah, it's worth it for us to have them do that and approve that and have them do 2 months of time donated to working on this community source project. But if they don't, maybe there are other priorities or other things that programmer needs to do that does not allow you to approve that, then you presumably wouldn't. That doesn't mean that that person could not pursue that on his or her own time. And some programmers will do that simply because they just are interested. If you consider the list of community source products in use by Quali-Ole or ViewFind, it seems unlikely that a library would have a compelling need or the number of staff to be involved in the future development of many of those products, particularly the ones that I would generically term back office applications like Tomcat, Maven, PHP, the tools, and other things that are necessary for the product, but are not encountered directly by either library staff or by library users. While they obviously have to be there in order for the software to work at all, they are in a sense peripheral to the overall mission and purpose of a library. The other thing to consider in this case is that those kinds of products such as Tomcat, Maven, all of those, they're in widespread use all across the board in all types of software environments. They already have large numbers of community members, and it's unlikely that in the mid to short term, a library would particularly benefit from becoming a community member. Now again, it could well be true that an individual staff programmer that you have might want to work with these products because it would help that person better serve the purposes of the library. And so an individual's involvement could also be an option. It's just that the organization itself would not necessarily be directly involved. I think, obviously, for a library, being directly involved in the development of Quali-Ole and ViewFind would be very important, and we are both. Chicago was a founding partner for the Quali-Ole because the existing choices we had on the market did not meet our requirements. And because the product still has more development to do in which we have an interest, we are going to remain a development partner for the foreseeable future. And that means not only paying the money to do that, to maintain our memberships, but it also means the involvement of our staff. One thing that I think is important is that traditionally in lots of organizations, the systems department, or whatever it's called, has often been the one that's supposed to figure out what everyone wants. And sometimes that's worked well, and sometimes it hasn't worked so well. And as I mentioned earlier, one of the virtues of open source and community source is that tends to grow from a group of people saying, you know, we really need to do this, and there isn't anything that's allowing us to do this, so we're going to go out and do our own. It's sort of like, we've got so much talent here, we could put on our own show. It's very much that kind of thing. Well, as time goes on and the products become more and more sophisticated and more developed, they get into finer and finer and finer detail. And so it's at that point where you really, really, really need the people that really directly work with the software to be able to say, yeah, that's what really works well, or that's not what's going to help me. So you really need to get your whole staff involved in this if you really want to get into the nitty-gritty of saying, what is this product going to be? Because it's only those people that can really successfully define requirements. And if they're not doing it, then you're just going to have to accept what comes along from other people. So if it's important to your staff to get a system that really reflects what they need, then they have to be as actively participatory in these projects as any technical or systems staff. We will continue to do the commitment we have made to Viewfind is that we have had at least 2 or 3 people who have been actively working with the Viewfind developers. We have already submitted some of our own code to that project, so we will continue our involvement in Viewfind. But again, because that community is much less formally structured, it's just a matter of our just saying we're going to continue to have these people work with you, and we'll finance their trip to the annual Hackfest and so forth. We might find at some point we want to become more involved in the Solr community. Solr is the search and indexing engine that is used by both Koaliolé and Viewfind. And it may be that because of our particular needs in library settings, we may need or may want to become more involved in Solr. But at the time, we're really not. We're just really a user. So what did we end up doing in terms of support and membership? Well, I've already sort of covered some of this. Here is the same list of software as I showed you before, but what it does is it shows you the ones for which we purchased support and the 2 organizations of which we are active members. And when it says neither, it means we didn't buy support and we're not active members of that particular community. We're just users. We purchased support for Solr because this indexing search engine is relatively new, and we have much to learn about how it's interacting with both Koaliolé and Viewfind, because it is used by both to generate its indexing and search engines. After a few years of getting support, and we happened to purchase it from LucidWorks, which is one of the support vendors available, we may decide after a few years that we really don't need that support anymore. We're happy dealing with it on our own. Red Hat Linux is also, Linux is a commonly used operating system, and traditionally most shops tend to purchase support for operating systems simply because it tends to be one of the most sort of generic part of your operations, and it's just one less thing you have to worry about in a sense. And Red Hat Linux is one of the most popular vendors of support for the Linux system, and there are many, many others. On the other hand, we didn't feel the need to buy support for anything else, partly because all of these other things have well-established communities. There are plenty of sophisticated users of these products, and we can probably find on the internet or wherever for free any question we might possibly have with them. One of the exceptions to that is for MySQL. We went out and purchased and sent someone to training offered by Percona, which is a vendor that provides lots of support packages for MySQL, which is open source. So again, this is a good example of you mix and you match, you choose this, you choose that. And again, the nice thing about open source is that for support, you have all different varieties of vendors to choose from. And as far as membership goes, well, you don't have to become an active community member if you don't feel that it's in your best interest to do so. We are, in fact, active community members of Viewfind and Qualio-Lay. But that doesn't preclude the fact that some of our staff might become involved in any of these other products simply on their own initiative or because it would help them do the jobs they need to do to support Viewfind and Qualio-Lay. And one of the reasons, of course, we don't feel the need to purchase support for Qualio-Lay is that we are one of the original development partners. We are one of the first of 2 implementers, and as such, we have right now continuing and ongoing immediate contact with the developers. So we're in a phase of the product where we're in production. With the initial version of the software, we are finding bugs, of course. We have back and forth directly with them, getting bug fixes directly from them. So we, in a sense, are getting support from the developers right now. At some point, that will stop as the product is finalized and stabilized. But we will still be involved as members, and we'll still be having a say in future development. This is the list of the support vendors you can find for these 2 major products. And in conclusion, I'd just like to say that there, as you've heard already, there is no one-size-fits-all approach to what happens next when you decide to adopt open source or community source software. The software that is truly mission critical is obviously the one where involvement may make sense, as you saw in the previous presentation. The Meadville Public Library is actively involved in Koha and their own product, which of course is a perfect example of why you would choose to be devoted to those as opposed to some of the others. I think that is probably the best decision to make in terms of active involvement. If it's truly mission critical for you to use this software, then that's what we need to be most involved in. But all of these products, regardless, are always available to anyone who wishes to use them. User is not a 4-letter word in this new world of open and community source software. Thanks.
Thanks, Stuart. That was quite the contrast on many levels. The contrast between how the OLE community is structured compared with the Viewfind community, contrasts in level of user participation from the organizational level. The organization is choosing to participate and dedicate its funds and so forth, versus the individual staff level and so forth. All of these contrasts and you know that this isn't a black and white issue. You're a member of the community or you're not, or you're participating in the activities of a community or you're not. Did you find it, or have you found any difference between how the staff, particularly outside the technology department, have approached the OLE project and the Viewfind project?
Not really. The decision to go with Viewfind was made by a group within our library made up of public services people as well as technical staff. And they evaluated several products and came to the conclusion that Viewfind was the best solution for us. And some of that was driven by technical requirements. What they for example, looked at, they were interested in Blacklight, which is another open source user interface. That, as I recall, uses Ruby on Rails, if I'm not mistaken. And we already had a lot of people experienced in PHP, which is what Viewfind uses. Sure. And again, so that again comes back to your organization, culture, policies. If you've already got a bunch of people with that experience in PHP, it's going to be that much faster and easier for you to adopt something that is written in that other than Ruby on Rails. I think there were also some concerns expressed about Ruby on Rails and as a tool or whatever, and this is one of those techie discussions that goes right over my head about the various virtues of one versus another technology for using it. But those decisions, but it wasn't just that, it was also the feature function set that existed in those products at that time, and also an evaluation of how many more things would we want to have in order for us to make it the ideal user interface for us. And on those basis, I think that's why we ended up figuring out that, at least for us, ViewFind was better. Now, for Quali-Ole, that was driven more than anything else by what several groups, we did look at lots of different options and the history paper that my supervisor, Francis McNamara, started and will be available shortly, goes through a lot of the contortions we went through to look at things. And those were driven partly by functional requirements, which we specifically asked the various groups in the library to come up with what they thought were the absolute essential. We have to have these kinds of functions in place before we would move to any product. And we used those as a way of saying, would this one work, would that one work, and so forth and so on. We also, though, did not want to simply make a lateral move. When our previous system, there were replacement possibilities for it in the marketplace, but when we looked at them, we realized that at that time, the only thing that we would be doing was making a lateral move. We weren't getting any significant changes or additional features or enhancements. So we needed to find something newer. And that was about the time that this group of academic librarians began to think about doing this joint development project, which eventually turned out to be Quali-Ole. So that's where we ended up. And it was more, I don't think we had any particular, we looked at Koha and Evergreen as possibilities as well. We didn't go with Koha because we thought there were some architectural issues that might be difficult, and Evergreen seemed to be in a state that we weren't really quite sure about as to whether or not there would be enough interest in the academic community to move that product along so it would be suitable for academics. So that at the time, we looked at it, Evergreen, for example, as I recall, had no acquisitions module at all.
That's a recent addition.
And
yes.
we had to have that, obviously.
Right.
And so, and I think there was also some hesitation on the fact that it was using another open source operating system, Postgres, and there was some concern that we had there was no experience in our campus IT services have always run our production environments for us and been the sysadmins for the actual hardware, even though we control all of the application software. And I think there was concern on the part of IT services that without any Postgres experience at all over there, they were rather reluctant to say, yes, we do it. So that was another reason why, Evergreen was kind of ruled out as well. But we didn't rule out anything because it was proprietary versus open. We looked at basically everything. And because Quali-Ole seemed to be the best way to go at the time, that's what we ended up doing. And since then, of course, there have been other new products brought out that, had they been in a more mature state at the time we went this route, perhaps we might have ended up with those. Who knows? Who knows?
So if I may assume, Quali came first and ViewFind came second.
Actually, they had made a decision we had put in a user interface called, well, it was the
Aqua Browser.
Aqua Browser had been an addition to our traditional online catalog from our integrated system. And we had liked Aqua Browser, but it had gotten to the point where it wasn't going to go any further for us because of the way we had purchased it and developed with. It's a long, complicated story. Basically, installation of Aqua Browser was a unique one because at the time we purchased it, we had been working with the original developers of that product to put in features that then never got put into the product that was now being sold by another company. And so, and that company decided not to allow, it was going to be running everything as a hosted service, which we did not want. So we had decided to replace the Viewfind Lens or Aqua Browser with another product, and that was the incentive to go out and evaluate, and that's when we decided to do Viewfind. But because Viewfind was open source, we did not feel that there would be any, and because Koali Ole was intended to be open source, we did not think there would be any barrier from us getting the two to work together.
Right.
So that's the sequence.
Has these two very different styles of open source community in your organization, I'm wondering if they've rubbed off on each other. I mean, I could maybe characterize, and I might get in trouble for this, the Koali Ole is kind of the stuffy blue shirt and you know, red tie kind of formality, and the Viewfind is as the scrappy, you know, come as you are kind of methodology. I'm just struck by these contrasts, and you know, what's been the interaction between your staff between these two communities, and has it, how has that worked out?
The technical staff overlaps. So
you in both projects?
Yes,
yeah.
in both projects. So that's one thing. I think this to me is really the key here is how big is this open source piece of software. A user interface is a reasonably discrete product. It does not, I mean, it doesn't have thousands and hundreds of bells and whistles and all kinds of, yes, there are certainly things that tend to be, you know, you might want to have fairly detailed stuff here or there, but it's a fairly, I don't want to say small, but it's not a huge.
Discrete.
Yeah, it's a discrete product. And ILS, an integrated library system, is a huge undertaking. Even if, I mean, I think you would agree that even with Koha, which originally started out as a fairly modest system, if you want to improve on it and keep the integrated nature that these systems have, you are facing a very complex project from a development standpoint. And I think to try to do an integrated library system using the Viewfind model, it just would never have happened. It just wouldn't work because there's just too much to get done. There's too much to do. It's too big a project to do it in sort of like and kind of an off-the-cuff kind of way. Now, that isn't to say that they haven't started out like this, but they have been relatively small-scaled. Like I think Koha and Evergreen were developed for very specific types of organizations, where they both basically started out with one organization, and then they sort of grew from there. We all wanted a sort of a full-blown, full-fledged ILS mature product that we could put in and run with.
Multi-institutional from the get-go, yeah.
And, you know, so that's a major undertaking. So I think it required a much more formal kind of approach from the get-go. At least that's my interpretation of that. But you're right, they're very different environments.
Yeah. While John is coming back up here, let me just make sure I haven't missed anything. Laura and Sharon and Sybil, you know, thank you for tweeting out these summaries. We'll see if we can find a way to capture them along on our discussion site. Thought it would be useful to move to some of the seed questions and see where those lead us. So I asked a question, and John helped me clarify it. What are the adopters' roles and responsibilities for making the open source software community sustainable? And I was thinking sustainability of the project was the clarifying question that you asked. as well as sustainability from the adopters' use of it. So either of you can feel free to answer that from either perspective.
Well, I mean, from our perspective, what we're looking for is a community that's stable, that works, that we can rely on their product when they release it. If it's a stable version, we put a stable version in. We're not going to be surprised by the the product that we have. And we're always looking at the bug reports also to make sure that there's no surprises, when we implement something. So really, it's a lot of communication. I mean, it's communication on multiple different levels, IRC channels, telephone calls, to a lesser extent for us, but a lot of email, and then there's the old personal connection that we try to get to a community meeting at least once every 2 years. So we have that personal connection. They know who we are, we know who they are, and frankly, a lot more can get done in a 20-minute face-to-face conversation than 6 months over an IRC channel. And so really, the communication for us is so important with the open source, and we're always trying to make sure if we participate in a community that we can communicate somehow with them. And even if it's just a very good frequently asked questions page, we always evaluate the product and how we can communicate with that organization if we need to get to them in a hurry.
I think that is key. The Koali project, because it's still there's a lot of active development going on still, has had a structure whereby the functional council, which is sort of which is again the one that sort of decides on priorities and gives its blessing to various things, in the technical council, they have regularly scheduled meetings that are done by WebEx. And there's a weekly functional council, and I think the technical council may meet less frequently. The board of directors, I think, meets every quarter. And then from time to time, there are what are called face-to-face meetings, which are done in conjunction with Koali meetings. Koali Foundation sponsors what's called Koali Days, which is for the users. It's basically for any user of the Koali products or anyone interested in using Koali products, plus the people that are the active members of those communities. There's also what they have there's an annual get-together called their community workshop, which is sort of a business meeting for the various projects. And at those functions, there are face-to-face meetings of this functional council, the technical council, and the board. And then I believe every quarter, the functional council has a face-to-face. And these are not only the people on the functional council, they are also the primary, what are called the analysts in the subject matter interest groups. They also attend those face-to-face meetings. So the person and the coordinator of those groups. So for each of the functional areas, there are two people that represent kind of the interest of those groups within the libraries who are there at these meetings of the functional council. So I would have to say that if it hadn't been for WebEx and Google Docs, I don't think we would have gotten nearly as much done as we have in the time we've been working at this, because those really do facilitate a lot of communication. It makes it certainly much easier than having constant face-to-face. I do think there is the value, as you said, in the face-to-face, and which is why we continue to have them. Now all of that may change as this project becomes more mature. One would expect it to, but that's what we're doing for the foreseeable future. I think that it's really hard to say, because I think you're right. All these projects are different, and all these communities are different. And some people probably can get away with just an occasional phone call or occasional WebEx session, and that's it. And then others really just need more. And again, I think it really comes down to what is the extent of this particular application? How big is it? How complex is it? What really needs to be involved in moving it forward? And obviously, the more single function kind of application you have, the less complex it is.
I wonder if this might be a good point to pick up the comment from the Archivematica account that tweeted yesterday, because it's talking about the interplay between the various communities. Every community is different, but their question was, how do we as community leaders help link or integrate these communities as increasingly institutions need overlapping open source solutions? And Stuart, I think of the interaction between, again, I'm still struck by these contrasts of Olay and Viewfind, or Olay and Blacklight, how these communities might come together.
I would think that a lot of that would be driven not so much from the functional needs requirements, but more probably from a technical side, because I think technical people, when they confront programming issues or architectural concerns or whatever, they have a much better sense of, well, if this open source product could do this and this one could do that, then we could somehow we'd have and so what I'm trying to say is that I think a lot of those needs that emerge are going to be resolved by these technical people getting the various communities to interact, because they can see what possibilities exist elsewhere. Because they always, as far as I know, there are always, if you decide to develop anything, there are any number of choices you have for what tools you use, what your architecture is going to be, and all of that. And if you choose the ones that are in common use, that are already out there as open source, then you're just going to get more and more and more into the fact that, well, if these all could be better coordinated, we'd all make it easier for us. And I think that is the user need that maybe will drive that. I don't know.
The other thing I found is that the technical people are usually contribute to more than one project. Many of the COLA developers also contribute to Equinox, or to Evergreen, excuse me. And they may also belong to PHP and to the Perl, community, or they may belong to some other community, contribute to Linux, And so usually the technical people at the lower level usually are involved with 3 or 4 or 5 communities at the same time. So I think it's more of a bottom-up type of a thing than a top-down.
These networks of people.
They're very strong, but they're very informal, and there's absolutely no control.
Right.
But then again, if you ever know developers, trying to keep them under control is very difficult. So, but I'm just saying that those connections are there. They're just not easily seen from from the macro perspective. It's down on the user at the developer level that you would see them. And so they actually are very effective and they work. But it's like I say, it's a very informal process.
But trying to make it intentionally happen.
Yeah, good luck on that.
I think there are some things that happen that push people in various directions, though, from a functional point of view. And an example of this is that beginning in the 90s, obviously, and certainly nowadays, most libraries have had to contend with moving from print-based systems to, virtual and leased resources and e-journals and all e-books and all of this. And managing your acquisition and maintaining e-book and e-journal collections is significantly different from managing print. And the marketplace responded to this need by developing what are called ERM systems, electronic resource management systems. And they were done by, most of them were done by the commercial vendors that produced the integrated library systems that everyone was using. But most of these ERMs, almost all, I believe all of them, were produced as standalone products that were designed so that anybody could buy them. You didn't have to be that vendor's ILS. You could buy it, and it was supposed to be able to stand on its own and somehow work as it needed to. And this was probably one of the least successful forays into that, trying to meet that need, because all of the people that ended up using them had 2 complaints. They were not integrated with their acquisitions functions within their integrated library system, and they were all designed as one size fits all, so that if you had to lockstep your way through all of, because when you buy an electronic resource, you might start out with a trial period, and you need to record the information about the trial period. Then maybe you sign a contract. Well, signing a contract typically means you have all these back and forths with the vendor about what the details of your contract are. And then you finally get it, and then there are certain things you have to turn on or off or whatever. Unfortunately, all these systems made you do everything the same way, but there may be certain packages that you just buy and you don't worry about anything else. And so you just want to leap in and begin your processing here. That wasn't permitted under these older systems. So the marketplace sort of didn't give people what they really needed. And as a consequence, for example, with Quali-Ole, we built in an electronic resource management system into the product. And very specifically so that we could have that integration with acquisitions. And so this was a case where functional people said, we need this. The vendor community responded, but ended up giving them things that didn't really work that well. And that was not so much, I think, a failure of anybody, it's just that nobody really knew what to do about some of this stuff. And so these, as a sort of a first generation product, turned out to be not as successful as people had hoped. So now there needs to be another round. Well, are the ILS vendors going to go back and rewrite some of these? Well, the ones that have written new systems have incorporated this ERM stuff into their systems. So it's a very messy business, I think, in terms of how you get what you want. And I think that the open source venue or open source or community source gives you an opportunity, perhaps, to get more of what you need when you need it, and then have the assurance that if those needs change significantly, because you're in control of this application that you really want to use, that will evolve over time, and it will continue to be useful to you and continue to have utility for you because you're the ones controlling what happens with it.
And it goes back to your first point, because it's ultimately answering the user demands are front and center.
Right, and you assume that that's the way it will remain, that user community, that member community is going to continue to focus on that, rather than become some sort of pseudo vendor that just makes decisions. Nobody wants that, and that's sort of the antithesis of why these community organizations form, I think.
Stuart, I commend you for bringing out something that I think is often forgotten when you brought out the list of not only the primary package Olay and ViewFind, but all of its component parts, and described the status of your relationship with all of those component parts. And I'm wondering, is there a formal or intention there, or maybe even a rubric that you use to decide your level of commitment, or is it more organic as you find the need to come in and out of a community?
I think it's very much going to be based on, again, I think we purchased the support for Linux, for the operating system, because that's what makes us comfortable. And the Solar support was very specific. But in terms of being involved in those communities, I'm not sure that it was even a conscious decision that we would or wouldn't. It was just, we know that those were what Koali and ViewFind use. We're comfortable that they use them. If we ever got to a point where we felt, I think, that any one of those pieces was somehow the key to improving the core product that we're really interested in, we would tend to get involved. Like Solar, as the example that I used, was that we might very well want to be much more involved with Solar, simply because we may find that in order to keep it doing what we need it to do, or to keep it advancing in ways that we see as valuable, we will need to become part of that community. But we didn't see that need right now. So I think part of it is just like we assumed that we wouldn't be participants unless we found a compelling need to do so. And as of yet, I don't think we found that need. Now, I have no idea actually whether anyone in our campus computing group is actively involved in any of those communities. I just don't know. I suspect some of them may be, but I don't actually know.
But to their own needs.
But speaking to, well, I mean, the sysadmins in our IT services, they may have 40 applications they're supporting on this whole host of servers they have. They might want to be very intimately involved in Linux, as a member of that community. That might really help them do their job better. But whether they do that, I don't know. It's interesting. I don't know what our IT services people are up to with that.
Well, I mean, I think it's key to remember that any open source project is it's mostly made up of packages of other programs and other services. So if you have 3 or 4 open source projects running at the same time, chances are the stacks behind them have a lot of commonality and a lot of, you'd be probably running 3 or 4 different Apache servers and so forth and so on. So, and that's one of the great things about open source, though, is once you learn Apache, you're going to be using it over and over and over again to implement it for other things. So I really think it goes back to my argument that is the more that you use open source, the more you integrate it into your operations, the easier it becomes for you because more and more of the components are very similar. And so that what you learn once, you can then use for the next project and so forth and so on. Mm-hmm. So it really leverages itself.
For those that are out there, I want to continue to invite you to the discuss.phosphorlive.org site, where you can post your questions and comments, and I'll reflect them to our panelists. Also use the Twitter with the hashtag SCHOSS. Otherwise, I will just continue to have a fascinating conversation with our panelists.
Can I bring up an issue from yesterday, Peter?
Yes, please.
Yesterday it was mentioned about the market penetration of open source software. And Marshall Breeding, and there's an annual ALA study on ILSs and so forth.
Well, that he does.
Yeah, that he does, but
gets published by ALA,
yeah, and so forth and so on. And really, it's very difficult to measure how many people are using any specific open source ILS. It's a conversation that's come up again and again and again at the COA level. And we have no way of knowing how many people are actually using Koha at any one time. And I have suggested numerous times that there needs to be some type of a mechanism that maybe it calls home once a month or once a quarter or once a year that this program is in production, it's being used. Well, it becomes, you have to remember Koha is a very international community. And an American suggesting something like that is not necessarily.
This day and age.
No. Yeah. So, and even I said, well, if we just make it voluntary, it's not a whatchamacallit, it's not a requirement, and that won't even fly. So, and I know from my perspective that a lot of libraries do use ILSs, but they're not being reported by any company. We can't report them at the Koha level. So I really think, and again, it'd be hard to prove it using the empirical information that we typically use. But I believe that the ILS open source penetration is much, much higher than what is being reported through published resources. I really think there needs to be some way of measuring that. And how that would be done, I have absolutely no idea, especially if the COA or the OS communities, the ILS communities aren't willing to do something to help it out. But I really think there's a lot more people using those type of ILSs than anyone is aware of. And I do know that we get a lot of questions coming to our library in general about how to set things up and so forth and so on. That would be indicative to us that there's a lot of individuals out there very interested in it and using it in a production setting. And so I really think that needs to be investigated at a different level than we've traditionally have by tracking commercial ILSs.
What both of you talked about the evaluating the community. You both talked about kind of inventories of your staff skills. You have MySQL experience, but not Postgres experience, or you've got PHP experience and not MySQL experience, and those seem to be rather concrete things to evaluate whether you adopt a package or not. Are there I'm wondering if there's particular characteristics that you look for in the community, some of those maybe intangible things about how the community governs itself or how active its message list is, or how many committers it has, how often it brings out releases. Do any of those things factor into a decision? I imagine they do factor in, but how do you weigh them in comparison with the other factors?
Well, I think they probably would, except that for us, there was no Qualio-led community. I mean, we were one of the founding members of it, so there was
You
no...
were building the community
Right,
there,
and
yes.
the reason we went in with it, because we had similar institutions of size and scope that were interested, so that's what made that's one of the decisions, that was one of the factors making the decision. Viewfind had been around for a while, but so had many of the other user interfaces. And I really do think it really wasn't, the decision that was made to select Viewfind was made not really on the basis of the community so much in its activities, but really on the underlying structure of those products and whether or not they would really do the job we needed them to do. I don't recall that there was even, I think it was sort of assumed that since they were both open source, they would both have their communities, and whatever those communities were, if we adopted them, we would be interested in pursuing activities with that community. But I don't recall that there was ever an analysis done or any kind of evaluation done of what the types of communities were and whether one was better than another or not. I really don't think that came into it.
The metric we follow more than anything else is how often is there a release? I mean, is it once every year? Is it once whenever they get around to doing it? Is it once every 6 months? And we consider the gold standard a new release every 6 months and a version that's out there but not stable, then a stable version following behind it. And that seems to be the gold standard right now for open source communities. And frankly, it stresses out the community a lot. If you're on that type of a schedule, you have to have committers, you have to have program release managers, you have to have your quality assurance systems in place and up and running. And that's really the prime metric in measuring, I think, the health of an open source community.
I think it also probably has to do, moving forward, is if you look at some of these products and they're it's like everyone kind of knows what are the common kind of applications you'd want to see. Like we're talking about Tomcat and Maven and PHP and Java and these things. If you saw an open source product that was based on technologies you've never heard of and claims to be open source, I think you would probably give you pause and make you think, what are they trying to do here? I mean, if you saw something that was supposed to be better than Tomcat, you'd probably say, I wonder why it is, because it's kind of like, well, why didn't you just use it? Why did you try to reinvent something that's already working so well and it's already open source? And that would give you, I think that would just raise a flag to say, we need to better understand this if we see that they're doing things with products we've never heard of, or that it seems like they're trying to reinvent something that's already there. And those would drive, I think, your decisions.
And sometimes that's clear.
Yeah, I mean,
outside the cultural heritage community, I think of what happened to MySQL when Oracle kind of did its thing, and there were members of the community that weren't happy with that, and they forked the project, and off it went. But yeah, if there wasn't any kind of precipitating factor, you would go look for it.
I think so. But I'm not sure that really, and that probably has something to say about whatever community is forming around this product. I mean, maybe they're all just great pioneers and are coming up with the next best thing since sliced bread. I mean, maybe that's true. I mean, that's what happens sometimes. And I wouldn't say that it rules you out as a consideration, but it is something that would probably give you pause and make you ask a lot of questions.
I have again run out of questions.
Well, I have okay, go ahead.
I have a question for John. It's wonderful what you're doing, especially on a small scale. I've seen other institutions trying to do the same thing. One of my questions is, how are you handling backups for a situation like that? Are you using some sort of free software for backups? And are you doing virtualization of your servers, or is it all based around, like, rather than spending the money on licenses, we're spending the money on hardware, but how are you dealing with the hardware question?
Yeah, the question is how do we deal with backups, and then how do we deal with the virtualization situation? Backups first, because that's pretty easy. We use Amanda, which I think was University of Maryland that came up with that. It's an open source backup program. There's another program in that mix also that Cindy uses. All of our programs are listed on the meadvillelibrary.org/OS website. So if you want to look up that architecture, you can. But we do use multiple backups. We store stuff off-site. We're following all the rules and procedures on that. Really, the biggest issue we've had with our isn't so much the backups, it's trying to keep the darn room cool enough. Because it's an internal closet, and these computers generate so much, excuse me, I was going to use a bad word, so much heat that we've had to install an air conditioning system. Well, unfortunately, we have to run the air conditioning system when it's 7 degrees below zero outside, which air conditioners don't like for some reason. So we've had to put in a passive system, and then our biggest headache really isn't so much on the software or on the backup end. It's been the actual physical situation. The other question concerning virtualization is just about everything is virtualized except for the thin client network internal to Meadville. Koha is not virtualized. All of our other services are pretty much virtualized right now. And I can't remember the name of the program off the top of my head. I believe it's XM, and that's the one program we actually have to run Windows on because it doesn't have an OS front end. We actually Cindy has to run Windows in a virtual window on a Linux server in order to run the virtual machine. So, but yeah, we got everything pretty much virtualized with the exception of our main product there, which is Koha. And the reason we don't virtualize Koha is because we get so much traffic on that, and we really don't want anything else but Koha traffic on that. So that's really very much a production server for us. And so that's the thing that gets the most traffic. And on Koha, we run 2 servers. We run a Koha server and then a backup report server. So if you have to run a report, Koha does not like running reports because of the intensive natures of the queries. It really slows the system down. So we put Koha backup and the report on that. And then the other internal plumbing is we do have some internal plumbing where we have multiple connections in, and there's load balancing and load failure. So if one of our connections drops out, it automatically picks up automatically on the other 2 connections. So there's a lot of redundancy built into our system. You're welcome.
Any final reflections on, John, I know you were here 2 days. Stuart, I don't know if you were listening in yesterday, but any final thoughts?
I got 2 points I keep hitting over and over again. One, I believe open source development within the library community is something that we need to do instinctively. We need to do it as automatically as we catalog books. The idea of taking other people's ideas, storing them, referencing them, using them, enhancing them is to the very core of what libraries are and what our mission is. And I really believe that we need control of our infrastructure as much as possible. The second issue that I've been trying to reiterate here today, or the last couple of days, is that there's a lot of fear out there in the library community about using this. A lot more, whereas you don't necessarily have that fear with a vendor because there's somebody you can go to. And I really think there needs to be some outside authority, some outside agency that actually rates or certifies open source projects for libraries, saying this project is certified. Just like when we go to library school, you go to a school that is certified by the American Library Association. We need some type of an outside authority to come in and say this is a valid project, and chances are if you do everything this organization tells, this project tells you to, you will have a successful project. That assurance isn't out there right now. And you can get that necessarily if you do a hosted project, but what if you don't want to do a hosted project, but you want to use the software? You're pretty much having to evaluate and consider everything we've considered over the last 6 hours yourself, and a lot of libraries just don't have that capability. Whereas if they knew that was 4-star rated or gold standard or whatever you want to come up with, whatever level of certifications you want to come up with, the chances are if you install it and do the right procedures, you're going to end up with a successful project. I think that would be a very positive contribution to the open source community and libraries.
I would like to say that, and I can only speak for libraries, but this may be true of other heritage type organizations, is that I think there's been a very unfortunate belief amongst too many librarians who are not in a systems office that somehow the system is out there. It doesn't really have anything to do with me. I'm a librarian. Why would I need to know about technology? Why would I? Now that sounds very strange in this day and age, but I think there's still that lingering out there. I mean, I think a lot of public services librarians, for example, are very much aware of what users expect from, e-journals and all this, and they can do basic kinds of troubleshooting. But my experience has been that they don't even understand metadata as a concept. And they don't understand that if a user comes up to you and says, here are the results I got when I did this, can you explain it? They need to be able to sit there and look at those results and say, okay, the reason you got this, which you didn't expect, was because, and they should be able to explain this very clearly and very cogently. I'm not sure that all of them could. People in technical services who deal with the ordering and the cataloging and all of that, they tend to have a better sense of what you can do online, and they can see. Oftentimes they can tell you, if you got rid of this step, which I don't really want to do, and just go directly here, it would save me 5 minutes every hour. They're good at that, but they are only focused on their one thing. It's like when I once went to a meeting of the catalogers, and there were all these things about what was going on, and I said, well, why don't you just go to the online catalog and look at the way your record looks to the user? And I swear to God, there were gasps in the room that they would even consider doing this. And it's like, well, that's why you're here. You're not here to catalog. You're here to create access for our users so they can find things that they may need to see. And so I really do think that there is still too much of a sense, at least in the library world, and I'm not sure about the museum world and other organizations, but I do think that open source gives you the opportunity to bring home to people that the system we use matters, and it really is something that you have to be involved in. Because if you're not involved, you're not going to get what you want. It's that simple. And you have now a real opportunity, much more so than with commercial software, to be a direct participant and getting into those meetings. And if you get people saying, well, we don't really need that, or you can pound your fist on the table and you can make your point and you can get what it is you want. And that's all to the good. But if you don't know that, and if you aren't aware of that, and you don't know the right questions to ask, and if you don't want to be involved, well, guess what? You're going to get a system handed to you, just like it used to be in the old days. And that's not a good thing. That's the whole antithesis of open source. So I really do think open source is an opportunity to change that dynamic. If it's still true in your profession or whatever organization you have, it's probably there's some of that there. And I think this is an opportunity to really get people to see that, oh, it really does matter that I know what is or isn't in our system. And yeah, I can participate in this, and I should. And that's really, I think, the key.
And I'm empowered to.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, two great call for actions here at the end of the second day. Again, as I said at the end of the day yesterday, it's again your turn now. As I said yesterday, as you would in the hallways after a keynote or in the elevator on the way up to your hotel room. The discuss.phosphorlib.org website will remain open and for the foreseeable future. I will say if the discussion dies down, we'll take a static web archive of the web snapshot of the pages to put up. But as you do continue through the day and through the weeks and the time that comes, I do encourage you to come back and look at the discussion site about what others have written. Come back and review the videos of our presenters for the past 2 days. and add your own thoughts and questions and to keep the conversation going. If you're watching the recording of this session, please know that Lyrasis is committed to the resources to keep the discussion site up and running for as long as it is useful to the community. This symposium is but one of an array of offerings that Lyrasis has to support open source software. There is the main phosphorlib.org website, which has a series of decision support tools for organizations exploring whether open source software is right for them. The name does originate with phos4lib, but we are taking a broader view of that, broader into the general cultural heritage organization. And that's starting to show up in the registry of software packages, moving beyond libraries and registering things like archive space and collection space and other packages for cultural heritage. Coming soon to the phos4lib site are the case studies that I've mentioned, 3 case studies from academic and public libraries that have adopted open source. If you've signed up for this symposium, you can expect an email from me about that. If you didn't sign up for the symposium but just found us through the tweets of other symposium attendees from the past couple days, get in touch with me so I can add you to our list of people to notify when those resources become available. A word about Lyrasis. We're a nonprofit member-governed association of libraries and other cultural heritage organizations, and we're committed to helping institutions with the creation, organization, and management of the resources under their stewardship. If you would like to know more about our programs, either for commercial content licensing, our digitization collaborative effort, or consulting services for collections, or our hosting of Islandora archive space and soon-to-be collection space, please contact me or another Lyrasis staff member, or visit us at www.lyrasis.org. I would like to thank our in-person audience here in Atlanta for joining us. I would like to thank our virtual participants on the web, our speakers from yesterday, our speakers from today, and again to the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation, whose grant allowed us to put this on at no cost to the community at large. With that, I wish you a wonderful open source, grab a hold of your future inspired rest of the day. Thank you very much.